Balasana, child's pose. This is another real yoga pose, really common. It is used in all forms of yoga too, in all styles. You use this in your restorative classes, in your yin classes. We use it, variation or kundalini. You'll be using it in your power, vinyasa. It's a real common posture, and it's also a posture that we tell our students that they can come into at any time. It's a place to rest, to go to if you're overheated, if you're overtired, if you just don't want to participate anymore. It's kind of like you're out, you're safe, you're at base, you get to stay there. So this is a posture that's really important to teach the students and then show them the different variations on it. And so they can find a way to make this comfortable, as ultimately it's an opportunity to rest. And so we want to find a way to make our body comfortable. As you'll see that I put out some props. This is a really common posture to need props, especially if we're going to come and be here and rest here. You know, in some forms, they're here 30 seconds to 5 minutes or even longer, depending on what style that you are taking. So it's going to be important to be able to find what's comfortable for our body. What you'll see in the photo is you'll see me in extended child's pose. So there's variations too on how your hands are. The extended child's pose is an active variation on our child's pose versus having our hands behind us with the palms up is going to be a more restful child's pose. I'll also show you some other ways that we can use our arms and props to make it more restful too. So extended child's pose is definitely a more active. It's definitely a place that you're not in as long. It's probably integrated into your class as a transitional posture or a moment or a time to rest. Sometimes when you do child's pose for extended periods for your restorative, you'll go into extended as kind of for maybe 30 seconds to a minute, as kind of like warming you up and preparing you to exit. There's many variations on this, but ultimately your benefits are opens the pelvic floor, lengthens the spine, directs breath into the back body, stretches the ankles, knees, and feet, calms the mind, reduces stress and fatigue. This is a posture of humility. As you take a bow, you put your forehead to the mat, you surrender here. I also love using this posture as a way to begin class. Having everyone come into child's pose and start there, staying there for 5 minutes, breathing, melting into the body, melting into the breath. It can also be a really wonderful tool to prepare them for their practice. I also like to use this as in-between postures. If we just did a whole bunch of cardiovascular, using it as a way to calm the heart and so we can rest, so we can get on to some other postures. This is also a wonderful counter pose to a lot of things with straight legs. Then you can bend your legs. It's going to feel really good to have them bent. So we're also going to have some variations with how the legs are. The big toes can be together and your knees can be just wider than your hips. And this is going to stretch more of your lower back. Versus you can also have a wider child's pose with the big toes together and the knees much wider than your hips. So your belly, your torso can rest in between the legs. And this is going to be a deeper opening for your hips. So within the more active of extended child's pose to the more passive with the hands reaching towards the feet. So you have the active versus passive, or you have the more narrow to get opening in the lower back versus the wider knees to get more of a hip opening. So you can also vary this posture depending on what you are looking to get from it. We can modify by bringing in props, which I'm going to show you. blankets, bolsters, and blocks are the most common. So you can have a block or bolster underneath your hips. So what I mean by that is underneath the hips, you can actually bring it in between the legs here. So when you are sitting down, you don't have to go into such flexion of the knees. So especially someone that has knee injuries. This is going to work great with a rectangle bolster or even those big round bolsters. You could also, I'm going to go into that a little bit more later too, but you could also have a block underneath the hips too, so that way my hips aren't sinking down so much. So if with the big toes together and with the hips coming down towards the heels, and if that is hurting the knees or the hips or it doesn't feel comfortable, you can bring a block or a bolster underneath the hips so you don't have as much flexion. You could also put a blanket under the ankles or the knees. So also I'm working on this wood piece so I can create some stability when I'm teaching these postures, but I put down a blanket just because I need something soft to lay on, but I have another blanket here that could be really good to actually put in between the calf and the thigh, and so this prevents, again, too much flexion and it makes it a bit more comfortable. Those that have really tight ankles, that much pointing might be challenging too, so you could also roll the blanket and then bring your so as your big toes are together, bring your ankles on here, and that can feel really nice when you have it in the front of the foot, just on the front of the ankle. That can feel really good too. So, and you could use all of the props at the same time. You could have the blanket and the blocks and the bolsters and everything at the same time too, because if you're using this for a longer period of time and you want this to be a restorative posture, then you've got to get people comfortable. If you're using this for more of a transitional posture or just a shorter amount of time, then you probably might just be utilizing a blanket on the ground to make it a little softer, and maybe a block really quickly so they don't have as much flexion in the knee. A block or a blanket under the forehead, and a block under the hands when extended. So that's the next part of this. As we're hinging forward, you could use a block or a blanket or even a bolster for the forehead so you don't have to melt as far. You could use a block for the forehead too, so we don't have to go down as far. When you're using the block for the forehead, when you are doing this, I actually prefer the foam blocks because they're softer on the forehead. You could also use the blocks for underneath the arms for extended child's pose. So these are all ways to make it more comfortable. So what I feel is important is to understand that we can use all these props in these different ways, but then each person is going to be different. So what I like to do is I'm going to show you how to do the posture, and then you think about if there's anywhere that like just too much energy is going towards. If you just like, I feel all of the pain right here, that probably means that we need to make an adjustment to make it more comfortable. So if you come on to all fours here, you're going to bring the big toes together and bring the knees just wider than the hips, and then draw the hips back to the heels. So this is our more narrow child's pose, right? And then come on back up to table, and then bring the knees even wider, and then draw the hips to the heels. You can notice that your belly and your torso can get in between the legs. So this is our wider child's pose. I'm going to go with mine a little bit more narrow because I have a nice tight back, so I can actually put my breath into my lower back and get a nice stretch here. This is going to depend on body type and what they enjoy and what feels good, or what your intentions are as a teacher. So sometimes I actually say we're going to go into our wide child's pose, or we're going to go into our more narrow, or I say it's open, finding what's more comfortable for you. And then from here, I'm going to draw the hips to the heels and then hinge over and melt my forehead to the mat.
So for extended child's pose, I would reach my arms in front of me, pressing down into the palms so my elbows get lifted up. Shoulders actively pulling away from my ears. This is our more active child's pose. I'm melting my hips down into the heels. I'm putting the breath into my lower back, softening the breath. Here, it could be that you're struggling with the arms. Maybe it feels like it's too much pressure, or it's forcing you to go down farther than you want. So this could be a good place to bring the blocks, to make it a little bit easier to keep your elbows off. So it makes it more relaxing, and then I have to be less active. Or maybe you're feeling like, when I'm putting my head down, I feel like it's too much pressure, so I want to start drawing my belly in and hunching. So this could mean that you might need to have a block underneath your forehead. Now, for extended child's pose, we're nice and active. If we want to make it more relaxed, we can just bend the elbows so we're on our forearms. We could even now go into our more passive child's pose, sliding the hands back towards our feet, bringing our palms up, bending the elbows, softening the breath. Now, if you feel like there's just too much pressure in the knees, that it just hurts too much to get your hips down to your heels, then you could bring a block in between the legs to sit on. So this would restrict your hips from coming down so far. And then you could hinge back over, melt over, and see if that makes it more comfortable as you soften the shoulders, palms facing up. If you're going to have people here for extended amount of time, you need to get them comfortable. So talking to them, one of the best things, what I find when we're in the posture, is like telling them, if you're feeling too much pressure into the ankles, then we want to make an adjustment. If you're feeling too much pressure into the knees, we're going to make an adjustment by bringing a blanket or a bolster or a block. And so letting them know of like these certain points. If you feel too much energy just focused in one point, then we need to work to fix it, because we want to stay here and relax. If you're just taking a couple breaths here, we might allow them to feel a little bit of pressure as long as their body is in a safe place, just taking a couple breaths. But again, if you're going to stay here for a while, we got to get them comfortable. So if you don't have a block and it's too much to get your hips down, so you could bring the bolster in between. You might need to have a little bit wider of the knees now. I like to actually just bring it enough in between to support so my hips don't go all the way to my heels, so then I can lay on it. So now I don't have to actually bring my torso down as far. You can get really restorative by letting one cheek come down to your bolster. I might never move now. Of course, if you're going to let the cheek come down, you're going to have to make sure that you bring the hands underneath the shoulders, press up and switch to the other side. Otherwise, from here, you could also have the forehead down on the bolster. This is why some people like two bolsters here. They like to have this a little bit farther back, and then they like to have another bolster to hug and hold on to. This is why in restorative yoga, it's all about lots and lots of props, and you need lots and lots of props, because we got to stack our bones so we can be able to rest and relax. Ultimately, here, for you to understand that if we have too much pain focused in one spot, there are ways to make this more comfortable using blankets, bolsters, and blocks. So I'm going to come back into my child's pose here. I want to talk about exiting now. So from here, I'm in my restful child's pose, my more passive. The palms are facing up, the shoulders are soft. Melting down. So now, as I slowly want to exit, I'm going to slide my hands forward and bring my palms onto the mat underneath my shoulders. Take a nice inhale, press into the hand, lengthen through the spine to come up. Exhale once you're up to neutral. You could transition out by coming into all fours, into table, and going into your next pose. But ultimately, helping yourself out by putting the hands underneath the shoulders and then pressing the floor away is going to be really important. If you're in extended child's pose, same thing goes. From here, you can slide your hands back towards the knees so that palms are stacked underneath the shoulders. Take an inhale, lengthen through the spine as you press into the hands to come on up to neutral. Exhale when you get to neutral. So that is our Balasana, our child's pose. It's such a blissful, yummy, yummy posture as you can just humbly take a bow, take a rest, or a great prep and start as for your class. It's a posture you can come to at any time to take a rest, to take a moment. Empower your students to come into child's pose if they ever need to. And empower your students to understand that if there is too much energy directed in just one single point or place in the body, that we have tools and we have props to help us and support us so we can make this posture more comfortable. You can make this into a very active posture or a more passive posture. You can make this even into a restorative yoga posture. You can stay here for a couple breaths to calm the mind and the heart rate. You can stay here up to 5 minutes to even 20 minutes for some styles of yoga. So there's a lot of variations: active, passive, arm placement, body placement. We have our wide child's pose, our more narrow child's pose. So this one is really something you need to dive deep on. Understanding the alignment, understanding the variations, and then knowing when you want to use it for your own practice and when you want to use it in your class setting and what you want to get out of it, and then how you can help students find a place that's comfortable for their body when they're in this by integrating props. Balasana, your child's pose.